Oh, thank you, Shivan. I hope you had a good session. But now I'm so proud and humble at the same time because I have the pleasure and joy to announce a new panel discussion, and it's around all the RegTech ecosystems around the globe. And in backstage, I realized there's so many people from everywhere, all enthusiastic about RegTech. But the most important one is I can also announce Mona. Well, the person that organized this event. She is the hyperconnector of today, and it's a very nice and a personal friend of mine for a long time. And I think she shares the same passion as me about RegTech. So, Mona, the floor is yours, and looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, guys. Of course, I was gone again. We have here sometimes a few issues with this new platform that we're using, although it looks super nice. Okay. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Koen, and definitely very happy to have you on board as well to MC through the whole day. For people who don't know, Koen is based in Brussels in Europe, and so he had to go up very early together with a few other ones, of course, to be here with us. So I'm very glad. But let's get back to the session now. So before I go to set the scene about what this session is all about, I think because we are with quite a few professionals around the globe, so it would be really good to, and I can tell you it is from Australia to Canada and to Europe, and of course here in Singapore in Asia. So I'm very honored to lead this panel, but I would definitely want to ask the panelists. And Donna, I start with you to ask to introduce yourself, to let us know what you're more or less doing in the RegTech world, and then also why are you so passionate about RegTech?
Sure. Thanks, Mona. Great to be here. So I am the founder of the Canadian Regulatory Technology Association. We're a not-for-profit, and we're focused on bringing the stakeholders together, much like my peers here on the call. Why am I so passionate? Well, I have been a practitioner my entire career, and I've often sat between business and technology. And I always saw the disconnect. And I often played that translation role. When 2008 came and you couldn't build a product without having a regulatory element to it, I felt that disconnect heightened. And I felt that there was a need to collaborate more. And I think more than ever now, with the complexity of the ecosystem, the complexity of the emerging technologies, they're not necessarily complex, but they're new. I think there's a real need to collaborate within the industry, but also amongst RegTech firms in order to scale.
Cool. And I fully agree with that. I mean, we see that, of course, here as well in Singapore. But I really would like to hear now the same question and the same introduce yourself and know about what you're so passionate about in the regulatory technology area from the other side of the world, and that is Australia, and that is Deborah.
Thanks very much, Mona. And Donna gave me a great segue there because we're very similar organisations, although operating in a different part of the world. Like the Canadian RegTech Association, we're also a non-profit association, and we have 180 organisations that are members, 20% of which are not from Australia. I guess I feel so passionate about RegTech because about 5 years ago, I was really having a bit of a career change, and I decided that whatever I wanted to do, I wanted it to have something to do with the meeting of technology and business and how technology was going to change the shape of business. And having started my career in risk management, this led me right to the door of RegTech, and I feel that RegTech is really well positioned to restore trust to regulated systems everywhere. So that is bringing trust and confidence to mums and dads and brothers and sisters in the street who don't need to know what RegTech is, but by the sheer fact that RegTech is there, it can provide that level of safety and trust for all citizens everywhere. And so that's what excites me most about the opportunity for RegTech. So thank you very much for this opportunity today.
Great. And this is a very interesting statement that you make about, you don't actually really have to know about RegTech as a word, as almost you could say a buzzword these days, but it is more about, what it can do for you. And I know, Zaliia, I think when we discussed before, you had quite interesting thoughts about that as well, being in the Nordics and, already working in the industry for a while as well, whereas there was no word that was called RegTech, but actually the tools were already there. So the same for you. Please introduce yourself and let us know why you are so passionate about this area.
Thank you, Mona. And yes, on our previous conversation, I mentioned the national ID here in Sweden that has been around since, 2003. If I'm not mistaken, and people don't really think about it as a RegTech, but they use it every day, multiple times a day. But yeah, my name is Zaliia, and I'm the vice chairwoman at the Nordic RegTech Association. And we basically have the same mission as our colleagues who already introduced themselves. We are raising awareness about RegTech in the Nordics and beyond, and we are trying to acquaint both the industry and the broader industry, really, the economy, about these amazing solutions. And I think that I'm mostly passionate about RegTech for the same reasons as Deborah mentioned. It is actually something that is facilitating this, countrywide infrastructure, economic infrastructure, something that people use every day and kind of just feel that it is the way that it should be, how everything just runs smoothly. If you are logging into all this, governmental services, or you log into your bank with the same ID, it's just an example. Or you don't have to even think about cybersecurity because everything just runs smoothly. And I think that just knowing that there is so much thought and so much technology behind that is so inspiring. And I think that that's why I'm very happy to do what I do. And my day job is I'm the head of business development at Kidbrooke, which is also a RegTech firm, which is at the intersection of wealth tech and insurtech. So yeah, I'm very excited to hear about the other speakers now.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. And then I would like to go to London now, because the thing is that we have now talked to quite a few people that actually have a not-for-profit organization in the RegTech world. But I know for sure Sian is definitely not a part of that, but they have a very interesting other company, and she's also the RegTech doctor. So Sian, same for you. Please introduce yourself and let us know why you're so passionate about RegTech.
Thanks, Mona, and thanks for having me this afternoon. I'm honoured to be on a panel with so many great speakers. So I'm Dr. Sian Lewin. I'm co-founder and head of client delivery at RegTech Associates. As Mona mentioned, we're not a not-for-profit, but we're very much also passionate about bringing the two sides of the RegTech market together to really for the benefit of the whole financial system, to make sure that investors and consumers are protected and the financial system is safe and sound. And I'm really honoured to work with so many fantastic entrepreneurs and RegTech organizations, bringing such innovative technology to bear on some of the most intractable problems when it comes to compliance. I'm really passionate about RegTech because I was studying for my PhD how financial institutions dealt with regulatory change, and all I seemed to be coming across was problems and difficulties and challenges, and so it was really inspiring to then uncover and discover technology that could actually help those financial organizations deal with some of those challenges and improve the level of compliance. And really help to solve some of those problems. So yeah, really looking forward to the discussion today. Thanks, Mona.
Cool. Yeah, and then we go back to where I'm based. I'm not Singaporean, but I'm based in Singapore. And last but not least, Matthew is definitely also not a Singaporean, but also based in Singapore. And he and we have the same thing in common, that we are both members of the Singapore FinTech Association, which is also a partner for today's event. Only Matthew is in the board, and the board has just been elected. So we are very, very honored to have him with us. And Matthew, again, please tell us a little bit about why, first of all, your background, and then secondly, of course, why you're so interested in regulatory technology.
Sure, thanks, Mona. So hi, everyone, and thanks, Mona and RegPac Revolution team for the opportunity to contribute today. I'm Matthew Lovatt. I'm a tax director with Deloitte, focusing on providing advice and support to FinTech and RegTech. But as Mona mentioned, I'm actually here today in my capacity as a member of the executive committee of the Singapore FinTech Association. The SFA is Singapore's FinTech industry body. We're also a non-profit. We presently have around 1,000 members. The current ExCo, as Mona also mentioned, is relatively new. We hold terms for 2 years. The current ExCo was voted in around 3 months ago. And each member of the ExCo is very focused on growing the SFA so that it truly becomes the voice of Singapore FinTech, RegTech, and working to facilitate partnerships and collaboration across the ecosystem. The SFA has a RegTech subcommittee. Mona, I believe you're a member of that. That subcommittee focuses exclusively on the RegTech sector and RegTech-related issues. And in addition to Mona being a member of that subcommittee, the chairman of the committee, Chion Chai Kit, will also be participating in a fireside chat later in today's agenda. Since the SFA ExCo was constituted a few months ago, we've spent a great deal of time consulting with our members and eliciting feedback to try and then identify what our strategic priorities should be through to the end of our term in 2022. For those of you in Singapore and or are otherwise interested, we'll be hosting an event next Wednesday, 23rd of June, which will be making an exciting announcement to our members about membership and benefits. Now, in terms of Singapore is a vibrant location for both FinTech and RegTech innovation. The growth in those sectors over recent years has been pretty astounding. Singapore is also very often considered to be a gateway into ASEAN. And the SFA is committed to helping develop the ecosystem, not only for our members, but also our partner associations, including across ASEAN and beyond, and other stakeholders. And just to quickly touch on my personal involvement with the SFA, arose as a result of my day job as an advisor. Similar to what Sian was saying, my past experience was that it was very clear that laws and regulations were typically not designed to take account of the new and unique, quite often unique characteristics and problems that arise where we have new technological applications and business models. And my involvement with the SFA largely came on the back of me wanting to be more deeply involved to try and address that. And obviously RegTech is a particularly important development and set of technologies that can be used to try and address those types of issues. So I don't think that is very close to heart, and that was largely my way and route into the FinTech Association, and the reason I'm here with you today. So with that, I look forward to an interesting discussion with the rest of the panel about ecosystem opportunities and challenges.
Great, thank you very much, Matthew. So let's start with the beginning, right? I mean, we started RegPac Revolution like 3.5, almost 4 years ago here in Singapore to become the go-to platform if you wanted to look into a solution, if you wanted to have some advice, if you wanted to partner up with large incumbents, et cetera, et cetera. Back then, like we already said, like Zaliia also said about the Nordics, RegTech as an as a word didn't really exist. I mean, FinTech came up, Singapore FinTech Festival just started off back then, but RegTech was non-existent. And then fast forward, if you look at now around the world, and of course we can say, of course, COVID probably helped there as well, and we will talk about that later. But fast forward, we have really at least almost 1,000 RegTech companies around the globe. And I'm not saying they're all successful, but they are mushrooming up in those almost 4 years' time. So that is the exponential growth that has happened. However, if you really talk about regulatory technology, and that's what, like Deborah said also quite wisely, I think, is that people don't understand 9 of the 10 times. They do think it is a buzzword. If you talk technology, of regulation or compliance, people are already getting bored in a certain way, right? It is not really a sexy term. It is also not something that really they want to talk about. I mean, we had this morning an investment panel, and they said, we are in Australia and we are really looking into RegTech solutions, but we don't really talk about RegTech as a whole. So I really think there is an image thing there as well that we try to advocate about. RegTech is more. That's another thing, an enabler. It is not, the tech part is an enabler. It is not a burden what everybody thinks about compliance. So when I was in the compliance industry, a lot of people just thought compliance people are a pain in the ass. They tick the box. They don't know what businesses need. They don't help the businesses. They frustrate the businesses. But that landscape has changed quite a bit in 5 to 10 years time already. And with that also the skill set. But from an image perspective, my understanding, especially being here in Asia, is still that we are relatively behind what tech can do in the regulatory space. And from that perspective, if you look at, for instance, the growth in RegTech adoption or RegTech solutions as a whole, it doesn't really add up with the adoption and the challenges that we see here in this region. But I, of course, want to know your opinion for that. So if you look at, for instance, in 2000, when there was non-existence of RegTech, term, there was already a growth of 6 billion RegTech solution kind of initiatives. If you fast forward that predictions for 2025, which is only for a few years away, it is already 13.5 billion, so it doubled even more. So from that perspective, I mean, there is a growth, and it is growing exponentially. The question is, for me then, we are very enthusiastic about RegTech, but is it really evolving that quickly and that well in your areas, in the different areas in the world? And if so, what are the parameters that it is growing that fast, and or what are the challenges? That is a very open question, and I will chip in. But I really would like to start with Donna. Can you please elaborate on that? What is your idea and opinion about that?
Yeah, I think that we are here in Canada, we are still in the maturing phase. I would say we're still early in our journey. But certainly, as you already pointed out, the last year has extremely accelerated the adoption. We did a survey on this topic here in Canada. We're about 2 years in as our association. We've been talking about RegTech and the industry, but I wanted to really level state and try to understand what the level of adoption is. And I think the findings were very promising. About 30% of technology spend here in Canada is on RegTech. We are starting to see dedicated regulatory technology groups within organizations. There's strong tone at the top from the executive level. These are all good signs. I mean, we talk in RegTech all the time about we talk of it as enabler, that there needs to be strong tone at the top. I think that is also permeating in the terms of adoption. Where I see continue to see hurdles, though, is and this is going to come as no surprise to anybody, is that whole legacy issue, and it's really pervasive, right? Like, because if the larger the firm, the longer they might have systems in place. I'm a practitioner, and I've just rolled off a project. We're talking systems that are like 40, 50 years old, like really, and you're trying to layer on them, and so it's not that easy to adopt RegTech. The ease of doing things. I wouldn't say there isn't a desire, because but it's the ease of doing it and the cost implications. So also I think that the amount of opportunity out there to use RegTech is also very broad, and it's like there is an opportunity cost. Like, do I update my risk system versus my compliance system, and so there has to be a choice, and you'll always go to the choice of, okay, where am I going to most likely to get an enforcement action, or where am I most likely to get regulatory efficiencies? So, but I mean, that's nothing new. I mean, there's always business choice. It's just the complexity of the system and the amount of opportunity makes it hard.
Yeah. And Sian, because you said you help a lot of financial institutions, so building up on what Donna just said about the legacy systems, and also the fact that the process is relatively slow. What is your opinion about it?
Well, similarly to Donna, we ran a large-scale survey in partnership with the City of London Corporation, and we found that the picture was fairly optimistic, with nearly 50% saying that the level of RegTech adoption of vendors saying the level of RegTech adoption was moderate. So it's clear that there is some uptake, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I think one of the issues that we see is that RegTech is not a homogenous group of solutions. There are many different types of solutions solving many different types of problems. And I think where RegTech is being most successful is where those problems are really obvious and there's a lot of regulatory traction and pressure. So I would point to financial crime, for example. I think we at RegTech Associates, we research the RegTech market, and we have a database of, I think, 1,300 RegTech solutions. Nearly a third of those are solving problems in the financial crime arena. So that's one area I would point to as being potentially more successful than some of the others. In terms of some of the issues with financial institutions, I think, if you talk to financial institutions and people who are advocates for RegTech within them, they would probably talk about similar frustrations in terms of long procurement cycles, legacy technology, but also, I think, awareness and understanding of the RegTech solutions that are actually out there in the market and how they can help solve their problems. I think the Canadian RegTech Association, Deborah's organisation, the Singapore FinTech Association do a brilliant job of articulating those problems and benefits and actually bringing more awareness to the market. And I think the more of that we can do, particularly in Europe, I think there's a gap for that, the better, so that financial institutions are better educated, the boards and senior managers are better educated. So as you say, they can start with that tone from the top saying, actually, we know there are solutions out there that can help us do this better, cheaper, more efficiently, and reduce our risk.
Cool. Zaliia, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mostly agree with everything what Sian said.
That's boring.
In terms of Yeah, and in terms of the Nordic scene as well, we are currently also conducting a survey into the Swedish RegTech scene. And interestingly, we do that in partnership with the city of Stockholm. So we really see the interest kind of like coming up because we see that some of the governmental agencies are coming to us and actually expressing some interest in the industry and what is going on. But I would actually agree with all these challenges that everybody else mentioned, long sales cycles, not enough awareness sometimes, both among the industry and among the regulators as well. But yeah, I would say that currently the Nordic RegTech scene is in the process of scaling. We indicated that the year of 2015 was the peak of the year when all these RegTech firms were started. It was like basically 25% of our entire industry, emerging industry, started in 2015. So these companies are currently growing. And yeah, I would say that the past year actually brought quite a bit of acceleration to the adoption, both because of the remote working necessity, as you know, some of the compliance processes really moved into digital arena, and some of the things that you would usually do face to face, you would have to optimize within these financial institutions and try to automate where you could. And another thing, as Sian mentioned again, the cybersecurity became a bit more prominent issue during the times of the pandemic. So there was way more awareness of the need of such solutions during this uncertain times. So yeah, I think that basically summarizes it from my side.
Yeah, this is interesting that we are as well, Sian, as Zaliia, and also Donna all talk about more or less the financial services industry, right? And the legacy systems and the slowness and what the challenges are, and we apparently all relatively are agreeing with that. But Deborah, I know that in our last conversation, you actually also told that you saw quite a bit of a different trend in a way of, if you will, of saying, let's not look only within the financial services industry when we are talking about regulatory technology, but let's also look beyond. And what do you see in Australia happening with your association?
Yeah, thank you. And look, I couldn't agree more with my colleagues on the panel here about the challenges and the opportunities, but touching just on a couple of those things, because I think it opens up nicely into the question that you've just asked me. There was a dysfunction in the industry that nobody could collaborate properly. So we're kind of going some way to address that. And then there's been a layer of education that's been required to actually understand what is the opportunity of RegTech. And a couple of my fellow panelists have mentioned the word government and the City of London and the City of Stockholm. Government plays such a super critical role here because they actually creating the need for RegTech in the first place. They make the policies, they make the laws, and the regulators are there to make sure that happens, right? And the regulated entities are there to report on that and make sure that we keep the system safe. But actually, it's the government who actually create. They're like the conductor of the orchestra. So they're creating that requirement. And what is really interesting is just in the last 12 months, we have seen a big shift in the Australian government in particular to really look at not just RegTech as an export, which is very important, but they've now started to look at how they can consume and buy RegTech as a buyer. So that is the government as a whole buying sector of RegTech. Because previously, I think it is pretty clear that our government may have simply just gone to the very large end of town, who are usually based in the United States, and bought all of the software solutions like that. That's how they procured their software. They weren't aware, and that's because there was this lack of education, that we had this thriving ecosystem, third largest ecosystem in the world right here in Australia, and they probably didn't even know that. So That's been really important. And then what that's done is, through this education and the government getting more engaged and interested, and in Australia running now the consumer data right, which is there's going to be open banking, and then they're looking at open energy and open telco. And so that is automatically opening up opportunities for RegTech across different industries. And so right now, I am seeing attendance at our events from energy companies, from telecommunications companies, from the construction industry, and there are so many of them that I've even forgotten who they all are. But so only about 60% of our vendors would serve financial services only, but 40% are actually serving verticals outside. So it doesn't matter what kind of company it is, they can solve for that regulation or compliance challenge. So my call out is to say that RegTech sometimes shouldn't be nested maybe necessarily with FinTech, that it should actually have a life of its own, because it does have a life outside of financial services. So that's probably my slightly controversial statement for the day.
No, I mean, I hear you, and that is exactly what we also try to do today, right? Because we just had actually a session with healthcare and with the financial service industry to compare and contrast, and that is exactly what we try to do here. But Matthew, I would like to hear from you a little bit as well, because you're definitely representing SFA, which is the Singapore FinTech Association, and FinTech is of course financial technology, which will be in the financial services industry. What is your view of RegTech being a subset of financial services, or actually broader? What Deborah is saying as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think I tend to actually agree with Deborah. I mean, if we look at the Singapore example, I think Singapore historically has had quite a strong technology sector, and financial services also accounts for around a third of gross domestic product. So as a result of that, there's always been a big focus on FinTech. FinTech activity in Singapore has been strong for quite some time. And I think it's fair to say that RegTech, to a certain extent, seems to have at first developed alongside that. But I think if we look at the landscape as things stand today, and one of the things that the subcommittee, the SFA subcommittee on RegTech has done is produce a landscape image identifying who the different RegTech players are across the market. It's very clear that there's a full spectrum of different service providers in Singapore, not just limited to financial services. One of the other things I actually do find interesting, and this actually comes from a report from Deloitte, but there was an interesting quote that stuck in my memory around the RegTech label recognizes that the gap between software and non-software enabled services has widened significantly. So it seems to be the case that if we look at things through a local lens, there may be this argument that RegTech may have developed alongside financial services because of how important that is to Singapore. But if we look at the developments and we look at the potential use cases of RegTech, I do agree with Deborah that maybe there becomes a point where we have to sort of recharacterize things and say, look, this is not a subset of FinTech. This is really something quite separate. And maybe then that feeds into the educational and the learning aspects that we've separately touched on. One other thing I just wanted to mention, I guess it's maybe a slight segue, but in terms of ecosystem, both Zaliia and Deborah also touched on the role of the states, the government. And I think one of the things that we do see in Singapore is that government and governmental authorities are very supportive of RegTech, not only in their capacity as legislators, as regulators, but similar to what Deborah was saying, the local authorities have also been very interested about deploying RegTech solutions themselves to public services and digital identity issues. So, for example, in Singapore, we have a prominent scheme named SingPass, which is basically a digital identity service. On the back of that, there is also a scheme called MyInfo, which various different stakeholders can tap into in a secured way for different purposes. And through that, what we're seeing is things like eKYC, access to services using biometric data, and also sort of access to services, healthcare, things outside of the financial services arena. So maybe a slightly different spin on things in terms of the history, but maybe that is to a certain extent a microcosm of Singapore and how things have developed locally. But I do agree with Deborah that as RegTech has become more known, as solutions have been developing, and as awareness has increased to acknowledge the fact that such applications go far beyond financial services, I think there is a case to say, actually, this is not a subset, this is something that should stand in its own right.
Yes, and I think I on that note, I really do think that that solutions should also think about that. The vendors should think about that, right? Because if we say, okay, we look beyond the financial services industry, you also need to have a solution that can adapt to the other industries as well, and or have at least a solution that is also catered more to, for instance, SMEs or corporate SMEs, or because to be fair, if you at least for I also speaking out now only for Asia, but in those few years that we actually promoted and educated and advocated about regulatory technology, if you compare it with other parts of the world like Europe, UK, of course the US, they started earlier, but they also have more solutions that are scaling up and in a way coming our way. So it is for us also more difficult to say, okay, on solutions that is there and ready for every kind of business that is out there. It is maybe coming up, but it is still relatively early stage. And that might be different in Australia, because I know there are quite some solutions already existing for quite a few years there as well. But we're, from that perspective, I guess, a little bit in the middle, and we need to piggyback from different areas up until now. But before I go to the next question, I see we actually have a question from the audience, and I definitely think that is super important, and it has to also to deal with what you guys were just saying as well about regulator and government involvement. So the question is, yes, would really like to know about the regulation and supervision of RegTech firms that service regulated industries like financial service industry, and should regulatory risk facing banks and other financial institutions firms to be shared with their RegTech vendors. So I see it a little bit as a kind of a privacy issue, but what is your view on it? Anybody wants to volunteer, or shall I just point somebody?
Well, I can probably start, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I just saw this question and thought about it a little. So I think that it's a very interesting question. And actually, one way to think about it would be, if there is some regulatory risk on the RegTech vendors, it would be, like a burdensome thing. But I think that it could actually potentially solve one of the problems that the RegTech firms have, which is, it usually takes quite a long due diligence process for a large financial institution to onboard a RegTech solution. So if there were some industry level standards that these RegTech firms would be able to adhere to in order to get a certificate or license, that they actually, there are some of the requirements from the government for them to fulfill in order to be an accredited RegTech or something like that, then it would probably really benefit these RegTechs in terms of the sales cycles shortening. So that is just one view that I had.
I could add a few comments here. I think you already have this a little bit in the cloud. The concept of shared responsibility with cloud providers already exists. I know here in Canada, the Prudential Regulator came out with a consultation on technology risk. And of course, one of the big areas is third-party risks. And so I think, and I'm pretty sure Singapore, I mean, they're developing it when I lived there, have an outsourcing risk regulation. So in a way, through the outsourcing risk regulation here, it's in Canada, it's B10, you do have this kind of, it's not a direct responsibility, but there is a responsibility of managing your third parties, and the onus just goes down the line, right? Like from between the originates at the FI level and then gets translated down to the provider, because there's obligations from the provider back to the FI. So I think we're going to see more of this. I think this concept of shared responsibility, we'll start seeing this kind of voiced by the regulators. And I don't know if we'll see direct regulation, but I think there'll be moral suasion in that area.
If I could add something, I think what is really tricky about this question is what we mean by that regulatory risk. If that regulatory risk is the risk of financial institutions not meeting their compliance obligations to keep consumers safe and sound, to protect investors, financial stability, I don't think you can that financial institutions can or should outsource those responsibilities to technology, because they encompass so many other aspects like culture, like behavior. So I think we have to be really careful about what we mean by outsourcing regulatory or sharing regulatory risk. I think the idea that Zaliia mentioned around accreditation, I think is a different way of solving this problem, and that's certainly one of the recommendations that we've put forward to. If you want to build trust in RegTech solutions, having some kind of independent testing, accreditation to reduce some of that outsourcing risk, to reduce some of that third-party vendor risk, and overcome some of those hurdles in procurement. I think that's definitely probably a safer direction. Otherwise, you'll get into all sorts of problems around legal liability. If something goes wrong, is it the technology's fault? Is it somebody within the financial institution? How do you even begin to unpick that as a regulator or a supervisor? So I think it's a really good question, and it's quite complex.
I would agree with that as well. I think that the regulators to date have shown that they have a bit of a role to play there as well. And so in Australia, for example, particularly around financial crime, the regulator here is quite proactive in meeting, like face-to-face, or actually now virtual, but meeting each RegTech software vendor that solves for their reporting entities. They actually meet them all one-on-one. And whilst they would never endorse a product or a solution, they have certainly been known to give negative, what do they call that? Like negative guidance, if you like, on, for example, that won't work, rather than that will work. But they would say, well, that won't work, that won't meet the requirements. So there is actually a role for the regulator to play, and they have been playing that in Australia, and particularly in one regulator that I can think of. But I agree with the peers on all that stuff, the importance of standards, and certainly the idea of accreditation is a really interesting one, as put forward by Sian.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. Sorry, Matthew, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, I'm in agreement with what the rest of the panel has been saying, but I guess in terms of that sort of proactive engagement of the regulator, one thing that seems to be working relatively well in Singapore is the regulatory sandbox, which I understand is largely modelled on a sandbox that was put in place in the UK. Now, the idea there is obviously, traditionally, financial institutions will be subject to outsourcing guidelines and requirements in terms of when they're engaging with contractors, subcontractors, etc. And as Sian and RT Associates have flagged in their report, that and the implementation of that and dealing with those types of things really does have an impact in terms of contracting and collaboration relationships. whilst sort of accreditation, sort of pre-certification can be helpful in some respects, when we're talking about these types of solutions, I think there really is a place for the regulator to be getting involved in that and working with both the financial institution that is implementing and also the potential RegTech with the solution in terms of the actual deployment of any solution, to make sure that that is done in a way that is compliant with sort of the regulatory objectives. And I guess it's also interesting that if we look at the tendency of what's happening in the regulatory world, there seems to be this gradual position about moving away from regulation of entities to regulation of activities. And it feels to me that where you've got regulation of activities in that type of environment, you need a much closer sort of proactive approach to regulation than we're typically used to. So I can see in the chat box, Koen had mentioned something about supervisory tech. So to my mind, I think these all feed into these different dynamics that we're talking about. Should regulatory risk facing banks and other FSs be shared with RegTech vendors? Potentially, yes, especially if we're looking at regulation of activities, but I think we need to be working with all stakeholders together, including regulators, to be making sure that the regulatory approach is properly tailored and achieves its policy objectives.
Yeah, cool. And that is exactly what I just wanted to add on, is that although we should work with the banks and the regulatory data, but what also was very interesting in the previous panel was about banks and sharing their data, and probably other heavily regulated areas as well, is a huge kind of like I just said, a privacy issue, right? And although in Europe we have GDPR and all that kind of stuff, and we have in Singapore also our privacy laws, it is seen in a different way. I mean, normally it's more if there is a breach of data, then people start screaming here on this side of the world, instead of preventing things from happening. But from a financial services industry and a financial institution perspective, having worked in large banks myself for many years, they find it very, very cumbersome and difficult to even share just basic data. So although I totally agree it takes three to tango, and I'm fully aware of the fact that all the ecosystem players should work together and collaborate, not only in a country level, but actually maybe cross-border as well. My question is really, how far are we with that? Because from a traditional perspective, I haven't seen that much yet, except for, talk the talk, but do we really do walk the walk, right? So that is at least my opinion. But coming back to this certification, because that is something that everybody is talking about once in a while, because at the end of the day, okay, even if you have a perfect RegTech solution, and you are trustworthy already because you have a client and a big client, and you deliver what you said that you are going to deliver, and the implementation went relatively smoothly, etc. What I understand with RegPac, if we talk to those vendors, they always say, yes, I have one client, but it is still so difficult to get the next one and the next one because of those sales cycles, because the capacity that you don't always have, and maybe in any case down the road you did a little bit oversell and can't deliver anymore till a certain point. So my question to you guys is, till what extent do you really think that we need, and then also with everybody, right, with the regulator, with the financial institutions, or even other heavily regulated industries, come up with this set of requirements that makes it that a certification would be seen as a trustworthy kind of document or platform that says, okay, now if you're on that platform, or if you have that document, then you're good to go for everybody. Zaliia? What's your opinion about
Well,
that?
I think that it's quite a difficult task, really, to create such a trustworthy certification because of first and foremostly, and that is what we do at the Nordic RegTech Association, we're trying to do that because of this awareness of the RegTech solutions to begin with. I don't think that the financial industry itself is that aware of them. At least here in the Nordics as of the moment, we're trying to work with that. And I think that it also requires quite deep level of involvement of the regulatory structures, which also are in a little bit of an interesting position here, because the regulators generally, at least here in the Nordics, don't want to favor one player over the other. And it makes sense because you want to keep the industry competitive. And at the same time, you would probably want to facilitate the inflow of innovation and actually to help do their work in a sense. So yeah, I'm of an opinion that it is probably like a very good goal for the long term to kind of facilitate this collaboration between the RegTech industry, between the government, and between the financial institutions to kind of like come up with these standards together so that they make sense for everyone and so that they actually work.
Donna, you have anything to add to that from a Canada perspective?
Just adding on to what Zaliia said, I think the certification is very difficult because of the difficult to implement, right? I think the standards route has been successful. We've seen it in cyber, the success of standards regulation and the compliance to them. We here in Canada, we have a standards board, and they collaborate with a not-for-profit, which we are associated with, called the CIO Strategy Council. And they have implemented a number of standards in a number of RegTech topics. For example, trustworthy AI systems, they're working on something on digital ID. I think this is a way to go in that, you create standards from a credible source, government not government endorsed, but government supported. Like the Standards Council of Canada supports the CIO Strategy Council, and they create standards within the industry. I think this is probably more effective. It's because you're bringing the parties together, but ultimately via respected organizations.
If I can just add to that, when we made this proposal, I think we recognised that it wouldn't be an easy thing to do. I think there are probably waves of activity that needs to happen, and you would probably start with the things that are easier. I think we didn't necessarily envisage it as a way of accrediting RegTechs are meeting the regulatory obligations. I think that's a very hard thing to do independently of a financial institution. But I think you can start looking at things like scalability, interoperability, IT security, data security, all of those things. And it may well be that there are, as Donna was saying, there are standards out there already that could be brought to bear as part of that accreditation rather than having to start from scratch. So I think it's, there's going to be a journey to get there. I think one of the other complications is the national versus global issue. A lot of the RegTechs now are working across borders. If they're accredited in the UK, does that mean they're accredited in Canada or Australia? Does there then need to be some kind of global initiative around that? So I think there are lots of issues that need to be thought through, but I still stand by the recommendation that I think it's really important to A, build that awareness, and B, build trust in the RegTech solutions.
Great, and I am conscious of the time, so we only have 5 minutes left. So I just want to have one question that you can all answer before I go to your final thoughts. And that is more about the skill set. I mean, we just had a few sessions about, AI and skill sets and the future of work. But I think what we haven't really discussed yet, broadly, is about what I just started when I started off. When I started with being in the compliance department, my skill set was being a lawyer, and probably totally different than the skill set that is necessary now if you work in the compliance department with all that big data and all that data that is now coming, all the regulation changes every 7 minutes somewhere in the world, and how can you keep up with that? And you need to know at least something about technology. So for me, it is like, what are your thoughts about it? What do you see in your regions, areas about this kind of, in a way, the shift of skill set? Is there a shift? Are there educational programs that are helpful for professionals at the moment? What do you see? And Deborah, I start with you.
Well, certainly there is going to need to be a shift in skills. I think one of the things that's really important here is that organisations are actually equipping their people with tools. And so in some ways, equipping people with tools requires that the technologists in the organisation need to be probably upskilled and know what they're dealing with the AI and the natural language processing and everything. But actually, for most compliance managers, nobody's expecting that they're going to become technologists. And so what they'll be looking for is actually tools to help them to do a better job, to help them make better, discover risks earlier, and to help their businesses, deliver to their stakeholders and shareholders or consumers or whatever it is, and to build a better and more sustainable business. So I actually think that it's we are definitely going to need more technologists, and even if you just look at my kids compared to my education, their education, they're all digital natives. So there's definitely going to need to be some changes in the way that we do things, for sure. But I do think that for the next 5 years, I don't think anybody's expecting a compliance manager to be completely across artificial intelligence and natural language processing. As long as they've got a tool that they can use, to what I said earlier, that is actually really going to be key. And the challenge is, which we've just been hearing about, is how can we get those tools in, faster to help people.
Cool. Sian? Quickly, we only have 2 minutes left.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I think the comment I would make is one of the findings from the report was around the level of education around RegTech at the board level, at the senior level in financial institutions. And I think there's been quite a lot of discussion around digital skills of financial institutions boards. So that's one area that I think if they can be upskilled in their knowledge, I think that can then perhaps trickle down. But I think the digital skills and education around the boards needs to be improved.
Cool. Matthew, you have 2 seconds.
Nothing material to add beyond that. I don't think I completely agree that there needs to be upskilling in terms of these types of solutions, because I think if you look at the solutions, quite often there could be this tendency to deploy them for them to be spitting out results, but nobody can really explain how or why they did that. I think that you need to be able to understand the technology and how they work in order to be able to say that it's being deployed in a reasonable, justifiable manner. And I think it's important for people to upskill so that they're able to do that.
Cool. Zaliia?
Well, I would probably add that the shift in the education is already probably happening. I remember back at the university, which wasn't that long ago for me, just about 3 years ago, we had a course about managing digital transformation. So it actually becomes a reality of today's students to face the digital solutions and to actually, learn to work with them. So I think that as always, as it has always been, it's good to be at the intersection of two different fields. So it's always good to be curious. I think that's what I have to add.
Donna?
Last thing, culture culture shift, really difficult to manage, really hard. And the other thing I'd say is this remote working environment has created a brain drain, and people from Canada are moving all around, and we're losing the high skilled workers and the FIs, and they are going to have to think smartly on how to retain them.
Cool. Hey guys, we are out of time. Thank you very much. I had a great time with you guys. I hope we can meet up sometimes in real life as well, when we can travel again, and keep up the good work, and let's keep in contact. Over to you, Koen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mona. And I can only agree with you. What a brilliant discussion this was. It only shows that RegTech is so much more than just a word and a hype. So yeah, if it was up to me and if I was the organizer, we probably could have had this discussion for another, let's say 48 hours or so. But unfortunately, it's not the case. So by having this panel discussion, it also brought us to the end of another section of today, which was getting ready for AI. The next part will be around industry spotlights, but before that will happen, we have a 30 minutes break. And the break does not mean that you cannot be active on the platform, because the total opposite is true. You can go into the people section, go and meet your RegTech fellows all over the place, because I think one thing I learned today, that collaboration is definitely part of it. So let's collaborate, let's talk, let's chat. And also don't forget to just visit the sponsors, because without sponsors and without RegPac, these types of conversations are not possible. So show your appreciation, go and visit them, check them out, because as one of the things we learned also during this discussion, it's about meet your RegTech, learn about solutions, go and talk and discover. So without this, I wish you a very good break, and we'll meet again in around 30 minutes. So 4:10 Singapore time, 10 past 10 Central European time. We see you soon. Thank you very much.